Hey guys, Paul Morrow here again with another episode of Nightwatch. We're going to be looking at a few things tonight, boiled down. First of all, the Epstein files. Where does it stand with the Clintons coming in for their depositions? Where does the Nancy Guthrie case go now? And then two quick hits on Cuba, and then also the controversy over the big snowball fight here in New York City. Let's go to the Epstein files first. So, Hillary has had her deposition. It was a big nothing burger. Of course, it was going to be. She's not really much in the files, except for a couple of mentions that do seem to at least imply that she had some contact with Jeffrey Epstein. But her line is always going to be, I don't recall, I don't recall. She's a good lawyer. At the end of the day, she knows how to play that game. The big day, obviously, is going to be tomorrow when Bill gets his deposition. Now, what's that going to look like? Another nothing burger. I'm sorry, but manage your expectations. He's been doing this stuff his whole life. You saw the depositions that he had. If you were an adult and remember it, the whole thing with Monica Lewinsky, he skated on that essentially, although he lost his law license. But realistically, it's going to be more. I don't recall that. I remember my recollection of that is I was just doing XYZ. I had no idea, no cognizance. You're going to hear a lot of lawyerly talk, etc. Realistically, you got to say to yourself, why did they fight it so hard? Because that's what happened, right? The Clintons fought this thing tooth and nail and dragged it out so long that, in fact, they put themselves in a position of coming out to have to defend themselves after the files came out. If they had done these depositions when the whole issue originally arose relative to them being deposed in Congress, testifying to Congress under oath, the whole thing would have come and gone, and that would have been the end of it, and now everybody would be focusing on this other stuff. Sure, it would be embarrassing, but what it speaks to, in my mind, is that they got lucky again. So far, at least from what I've seen in the Clinton files, the Epstein files, there's no smoking gun relative to the Clintons. And I think a lot of us maybe thought you might see stuff relative to the Clinton Global Initiative and some of the other sort of money laundering, quote unquote, slush fund aspects of that whole thing. But so far, it's just those photos of Bill Clinton and when did you know, what you knew, etc. And that's the kind of stuff that Bill Clinton can drive a truck through. I want to put a fine point on the Epstein thing because I haven't really reported a lot on it because it's been so vague. Now you're starting to get some meat on the bone. And here's the thing that nobody's talking about. Where are the search warrant returns? That's the piece. I've said it a number of times on the air, and I got to go back to it. Every time you do a search warrant, you got to fill out what you got as the police, and you got to bring it back to the judge. Well, we know there was a search warrant done on a house on the Upper East Side. We know there was a search warrant done on Little St. James. There's actually footage of them. A drone is filming it through the window as NYPD and FBI go through the house on Little St. James. Reportedly Big St. James, which he had recently purchased, another search warrant, and then the house he has out in the desert out west, I think it's New Mexico. All of these places were subjected to search warrants. Where are the returns? You have to list what you found and you have to bring it back. Why does that matter? Because particularly the house on the Upper East Side, I suspect you would have seen something like cameras, a camera room. From a camera room, the following was removed. 14 television recorders, 36 videotapes, 82 hard drives, yada, yada, yada. You see what I'm saying? You would have gotten a much clearer picture of what was actually taken out of those homes. I know going through the emails and everything is going to be, at the end of the day, exposing. It's going to show a lot. But it has an aspect of what they call in lawyering gray mail, which is you throw so much stuff at somebody that you bog them down in all the details and you don't get really to the important stuff. If I were running this thing from the congressional side, the first thing I would have asked for from FBI is I want the search warrant returns that you, FBI, got recently when you did the search warrants on the house when he was arrested. That's within, the last 2 years. You'd have that, and that's the starting point. I have never seen that. I don't understand why. And finally, let me just add this. I am not a believer in any way, shape, or form that he was murdered. Epstein did commit suicide, and that's where they lose, I think, some of the public, where it goes from what did he do, who knew, Who was he literally in bed with, so to speak, collaborating with, and what were the circumstances around his death? Because to my mind, there's no reason to obfuscate how he died. There's no way. I mean, there are reasons, yeah, if you take a macro look and you say, oh, the rich and powerful were so concerned, but it didn't work. And obviously, if they were going to do this and they thought they could cover it up by killing them, well, you know what? They probably should have thought a little further ahead if there's such this grand conspiracy. You should have got rid of the evidence. Instead, we're seeing the bodies drop like flies. Larry Summer, this prince, prince of whatever, the prince of, I don't know, I don't follow those guys, but these Brits, the British royal that went down on it, he seems like a skell. He was all involved. There's a couple of Brits actually that have gone down as a result of Epstein. If it was this big nefarious conspiracy, you left the evidence out there. Listen, there's no way you could keep an entire shift of corrections officers, the NYPD guys who had to respond, because ultimately it has to be ruled a suicide and not a homicide, so it gets treated as a homicide. Cops got to come in and inspect the scene and handle the case. Then, of course, I can guarantee you this went all the way up to the duty chief, never mind the duty captain, goes way up the chain in NYPD. Then you have the videotape. You would have had the shift boss in corrections. You would have had the FBI in on it. You would have had the Inspector General of DOJ in on it. Everybody and their mother would have been on it. There's no way you could keep such a thing quiet. Even the guy that they say killed him, which was that musclehead cop from upstate who was on steroids, I mean, even he says, yeah, they moved me out of there. He's just, I'm telling you, this was a suicide by a guy who realized he was screwed. He had gone as far as he could. And then the other question becomes, as part of the whole big conspiracy theory, is, was he an asset? Let me just make this point. There are assets and there are assets in the intelligence world, all right? I did 16 years of my career, 15, 16, depending on how you parse it, in the intelligence world. There are people who are assets in the sense that you pay them and you direct them. And that's an asset, okay? Whether it is an undercover, that is a member of your organization, your agency, or if it's an informant, okay, a confidential informant that is either working off time, they got arrested and they owe you, or you're paying them, or both. The idea that he was either of those, so far I haven't seen the evidence. But there are soft sources, and that is to say, people that are in various walks of life that could be valuable to you. And it's sometimes better not to own them because of the stuff that they do. You don't want to own everything they do. So what are they? You say to them, look, you meet, you say, if you see anything in your travels, say something. It's realistically, you're sensitizing them to see something, say something. That's it. You're not paying them. You're not doing it. It's not for consideration. You just say, the circles that you run in, you see something we need to know, here's my card. I should be your first call. Now, is there a tit for tat? Yeah, there can be the implication someplace down the line. If you get jammed up, we can help. Did that happen with him in that first arrest down in Florida, where the story goes, the prosecutor said, oh, this is in the intel world. It's above my head. It's above my pay grade, I think is the quote. And that's why Epstein skated the first time so easily. Yeah, it's possible. And I'm the world's conspiracy theorist-minded person, okay? I pour water on every conspiracy theory because it's just so hard. You're lucky in government if you can think 2 steps ahead of the game. Never mind these people who think that there's 5 people in a room scheming and scamming everything out. It doesn't work that way. Trust me when I tell you that. But that said, the earlier arrest has those earmarks of somebody who was a soft asset and when the time came, called in a rather unseemly favor. As far as the Israelis and the Mossad, I can't speak to that. I have no idea what he was doing. Maybe it's in the files, maybe it's not. And we may never know, frankly. But that's my take on Epstein. Let's see what comes out going forward because millions of documents have come out and the citizen army is going through it. And hopefully we'll get more light on it. And I got no sympathy for anybody on either side of the aisle here. I have no doubt that Bill Clinton was involved in some stuff that he shouldn't have been involved in. That's my opinion. But if others on the right were similarly embroiled with Epstein, they deserve to face the music. I'm sorry, but that's the law and that's the way it should work. All right, let's move on. Now the Nancy Guthrie case, which is entering its 4th week. And people saying it's a cold case, it's a cold case. Is it a cold case? I don't know. There are earmarks here that tell me that, you know what, there's still plenty to examine, but there's no denying that this task force really does seem to have a lot of internal dissent and not really be operating on all cylinders. So let's pull in somebody we can discuss it with who's been on the ground out there. In fact, I was with him, who knows a great deal about it and is a great lawyer. We got Josh Ritter.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I got to ask you, man, the feeling I think is that it's starting to wind down. The FBI is saying they're pulling their assets. They're going to put them in Tucson. Reportedly, Savannah herself has come back to New York. Is that a legitimate assumption here that they're starting to draw back? Maybe the case is starting to go a little cold.
Yeah, I think so, sadly. I even began to feel that when I was out there last week, towards the tail end of the week. It just seemed as though the interest in it was starting to wane a little bit. And I mean, from a media perspective, not from
Right.
law enforcement, obviously, but from a media perspective. And we just weren't getting that much more information. Now, we do get little trickles here and there. There's new little developments. Every time there's any person out at her home, whether they're in an unmarked car or not, or in uniform or not, it makes a little bit of a stir and people wonder what's going on. And, maybe I'm eternally and uh, wrongfully or
Unreasonably?
unreasonably hopeful that
Yeah.
there's something more going on behind the scenes that we're just not aware of. But I think one of the biggest developments is Savannah coming out with that video
Yeah.
saying that the family is willing to put up $1 million. I think what that indicates to us is one, that they still feel that there's information out there that can crack this thing, that somebody knows something, and that they just need to push that person over the edge to do the right thing. But I think it is also an indication that they are a little desperate, that that's what they need is a tip, that it's not like they're working on some hot lead, but it might just be a tip that they're hoping will break for them.
Didn't it feel with this latest video, since you bring it up, didn't it feel like this was maybe the first one? I know the brother did that video, but didn't it feel like this might be the first one that was done without input from the FBI? That it was just Savannah Guthrie saying, I'm going to talk directly to the public?
Yeah, the last couple, I think, by her felt a little more heartfelt. I think the FBI is probably still involved and kind of giving her some pointers on maybe some keywords to say, some cues to say, because she's trying to speak directly to whoever that person is that has
Right,
that tip.
right.
That, maybe some psychological, tips that might help to convince that person. But it does feel like she's speaking directly from the heart, and it's on her face too. I mean, she
Yeah.
just looks completely worn out and exhausted emotionally, physically, mentally. I can't imagine the nightmare they're living through, going day by day, trying to put one foot in front of the other.
What a nightmare. I mean, we've all said it, but God help us. It's not even as reasonable and comprehensible as a traditional kidnapping.
No.
They don't even have the sort of recompense here, the safe harbor mentally of saying, okay, well, if we can arrive at a number, we'll get my mother back, or even God, hopefully not, but my mother's remains, which is Savannah actually kind of says herself in the latest video. You don't even have that. It's just
No.
this inexplicable, talk about a lack of closure. So now I got to ask you this. Look, we got this story that came out supposedly from quote unquote sourcing, right? The latest big leak that came out that said that the video came from the video that we all saw came from one day, the night of, but that still of the suspect, and it looks to me to be the same person, similarly garbed, came from a different day. Now, FBI hasn't commented. The sheriff's office pouring water on it, saying that didn't come from us. That didn't come from the FBI. But you and I both know that the sourcing, and this is out publicly, says that it was leaked from the FBI. What's your take? Is it legitimate?
I think it is, knowing the source, trusting the reporter who's relying upon that source. I don't think he
Right.
would come out with it. This is Mike Ruiz from Fox Digital. I don't think he would come
Right.
out with that unless he had double sourced it and felt that he could rely upon it. It also kind of fits with what we saw. We saw an individual wearing a backpack, carrying a gun, and then in that still, like you point out, he's not, which was just kind of inexplicable given, what we thought was taking place. So it makes a little bit of sense. And then I thought it was also a little squirrely on the part of Pima County with this statement that they made, because it's like a denial without a denial. They're saying, "Hey, we're not that, no one is confirming that, but at the same time there are no timestamps to say when any of this was
Right.
taken." And I
Good
just
point.
wish they would just tell us, to the
Right.
best of our knowledge, this is on the same evening, or to the best of our knowledge, it's not on the same evening. Because you imagine if there was more than one person involved, or that person had been, even one person had been out there more than once, how valuable information that is to the public. They're calling on the public, give us help, give us information, tell us if you know anything. Well, then give us as much accurate information as you can so that we can be helpful. Maybe you clue us into the idea that more than one person could be involved, and maybe that generates a better tip. Or maybe you say, hey, this person that we're curious about may have been suspicious on more than one evening. Maybe that cues somebody into, hey, my cousin, my uncle did behave a little erratically over this period of a few days. I just don't like the kind of cat and mouse that they're playing with the public about the information.
Especially when you consider that they seem to be in the business of crowdsourcing right now, right?
Yeah.
They got the height, they came out with that, they came out with the information about the backpack very clearly. They were hoping, and they put out the tip line, of course. They got the billboards up all over the place in the area. The FBI continually gives out the 1-800 call FBI number if you have a tip. So they definitely seem to want to engage with the public. But then, like you say, they're hiding the ball. Now, we've talked about on the air why, as law enforcement, you very well might hide the ball on certain things so that you can validate tips that come in. Is it information that wasn't public? Well, that means we got to take this tip more seriously, etc. But yeah, why are they playing games with some of this stuff? Like, for instance, to go to your point, okay, if they really do assess that it is a different person or even a possibility of a different person, say that. And the reason is because if there's somebody else that you're thinking might be able to come forward and say, all right, look, I think I know who did this. If you're saying it's more than one person, or think you even want to admit the possibility, well, people out there might be saying, you know what? I know somebody that this could have been that might be involved with this, but you know what? The person I know is 5'5", and
Yeah.
they've said the video is 5'10", so it's definitely not my guy. I'm going to keep my mouth shut. But if they have somebody else involved or potentially even involved, they bang that gong, because as you're putting out $1 million on the table, it's more than a million now. I know the Guthrie family put out $1 million, but we had well into the hundreds of thousands before that. If you're getting somebody, if you're hoping to get somebody around the periphery to flip, well, if there's a second piece involved that doesn't fit the description, then admit that possibility, because that's going to potentially open the floodgates. I know they're saying we didn't want too many tips, etc. And there's a continuum there. I get it. But at some point, you got to start to say to yourself, hey, we're running out our spool here, and we got to come up with something else. And I'm almost surprised they haven't given another press conference, but they've been so disastrous. So let me ask
Yeah.
you this. I got to go back to the potential air gap between the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff. Now, look, I don't know that anything the Pima County Sheriff has done or not done realistically damages the case. I don't think anybody knows that. It may be apparent in retrospect if and when the time comes. It could be stuff that's going to be damaging at trial, and we've talked about that on the air relative to chain of evidence and the quality of the crime scene, etc. But the perception is that there's two different task forces here. Have you heard anything else regarding that as we get into the fact that the FBI is pulling their assets back to Tucson? What's your take?
No, and that's the problem too, is that you make an excellent point. They don't owe it to us as the public to give us information on everything every step of the way. All they owe us is to be doing the best job they can to try to finance it, right?
Right.
So as long as whatever they're doing is serving that purpose, I'm fine with it. And I'm fine with being told, you know what, we can't comment on that, or we're not going to confirm certain information. All of that we're used to, and I'm fine with. But it does seem as though it's almost it's almost like there's a little bit of pettiness at this point with the lack of sharing information where they did share information at first. There were press conferences. Apparently, maybe the sheriff felt that didn't go well. Then he turns it off completely. Then he starts to do a bunch of one-on-one interviews
Yeah.
that have problems with contradicting each other. We need to have a little confidence in this investigation. And to your point, who's running this thing? Like,
Yeah.
just give us some, show a united front, if for nothing else, from a publicity PR perspective. Show us a united front. You standing arm in arm with the FBI, talking about all the steps that are being taken, how you're cooperating with each other. There's no fears about elbows being thrown, and take two or three questions and move on. But this kind of like not addressing certain things that are obviously a concern to the public, to your point of who's running this thing, are you pulling back resources? It's just creating not only confusion but distrust amongst the public.
And listen, at the end of the day, that is part of your job. I know we absolve them of having to tell the public everything. It's not their main mission, but it's a part of the mission. The cops do work for the general public. That's who pays their salary. And you do owe the public, if nothing else, the people in that area so that they can go to bed at night and know that, okay, I'm safe and sound in my bed. There isn't a lunatic out there looking to repeat. Now, that's never 100%. We all know that. But you know what I'm saying. I think that it is part of the job. And I think that has definitely been a little bit less than perfect, let's say. And, the point you make, I think, is right on target, which is that if you're going to start doing one-on-ones, then at least be consistent.
Yeah.
And I go back to my old English class days, and the professor, or my speech writing days. I was a speechwriter for a while, and saying, look, if you're going to use an unusual locution, an unusual phrase or something like that, be consistent. You can't change it each time. Otherwise, it's just internally contradictory and people get confused. And I think that's where we are a little bit. Now, I got to say this, and we only got a minute or two left, but I got to ask you this now. So there's this thing out there that the FBI doesn't take over cases. The FBI won't take over a case until they're asked to do that. Listen to me. I'm looking into the camera. It's bullshit. All right. I'm just telling you now, that's all crap. The FBI wants to take the case over. They're going to take the case over. Now, I dealt with it in the terrorism world all the time. And sometimes I was honest because I was in the federal task force. I was working with them. Sometimes I was on the other side of it. But trust me, they'll take it if they really feel like it's going to have a federal charge. But they can solve it. And that's why I bring this up, is because to me it's a little bit of a bad sign that the Bureau hasn't said we're taking this thing over, because they're not going to want, as the saying goes in law enforcement, they don't want to be handed a bag of blank that is essentially unsolvable. And in their defense, maybe because the Pima County Sheriff's Office blew it from the get-go, so they don't want to inherit damaged goods. I go into all of that because of the following. It is, to me, a signal that we don't have an imminent solve. And then I hear the sheriffs, and that's been my perspective now, that's been my position for a couple of weeks now. And then we have the Pima County Sheriff's Office come out and say something along the lines of, this could take a year or years. And I start to say to myself, you know what? In all the cases I've talked about on the air, just like you, Tyler Robinson, Mangione, going back to Koberger, I always said, give it time. They're going to get there. You'll see. They'll see. I am a little bit less sanguine on this case. I'm interested. Last thoughts. I'm going to give you the last word. Number one, I know you said you're hopeful. If you are still hopeful, how long do you think, and what will be the mechanism? Is it going to be a tip? Is it going to be the DNA? Is it going to be the purchase history? What do you think, if this thing breaks open, is going to break it open?
Yeah. I don't think you're being overly cynical. It does seem like they're setting us up for a soft crash landing with the way that the FBI, you're right. If the FBI thought they were going to have a victory lap on this one, they would get involved for sure, and they would take the whole thing over. I do think like they're stepping back. It does seem like the sheriff is setting us up and saying this could take a long time, which might be a cue for we've got nothing and we have no idea how long it could take. Here's where I remain hopeful, and again, maybe unreasonably so. First of all, You have an incredible piece of evidence in this case that was literally resurrected from the grave of ones and zeros
True.
when it
Very
comes to
true.
that videotape.
Very
That is
true.
remarkable that they've literally got the person caught on tape. Doesn't have their face, but there's a lot of information to work off of. Two, you've got a lot of tips, and there are people coming forward. So I think and I believe that the information to break this thing is probably already in law enforcement's hands. It's
Ooh.
in some tip somewhere. It's in some digital information somewhere. It's just that it's mountains of information that they're dealing with at this point, and it's trying to get through all of that. I just find it, and again, maybe I'm being too hopeful, but I find it too hard to believe that a case with this much attention, these many resources, the amount of evidence that they already have is just going to remain unsolved in 2026. It may not happen overnight. Remember, Koberger took 47 days. We're still
Right.
not to that point yet. So
True.
it may not happen overnight. It may happen obviously longer than we or the Guthries or anybody wished, but I got to imagine something is going to break. Some person is going to finally get the guts to come forward, or some piece of information sitting in the on a tip sitting on some guy's desk he just hasn't got to yet and had enough time to follow up on yet is going to break this thing.
Yeah, you and I think, are on the same page here that if and when the break comes, certainly if we run out the string here a couple more weeks, if you and I are having a conversation like this a couple of weeks from now, I think it definitely argues that we're into the tip zone. That is
Yeah.
to say, if it does get broken, and I think ultimately at some point it will, it may take years, as the sheriff says. But what's going to happen is somebody's going to get collared, somebody is going to get, be looking at real time or
Yeah.
talk to somebody in jail and says, hey, you let me out or you let me off the hook, I can give you something really big. I know a guy who knows a guy who says XYZ. They run the traps on it, and it ends up being the thing that breaks it. Because at some point, you got to say that the digital stuff, especially with AI these days, is going to sunset.
Yeah.
At some point, you're
Yeah.
going to have to say,
They're going to
right?
run out of it. Yeah.
They're going to run out of, like, there's nothing left. Everything's overwriting. It's 3 months out, and we didn't get anything from the cell towers. There's a lot to be done there still, and it does take time. But at some point, you're going to run out of terabits, and you're going to say, you know what, that aspect of this is a dead end. And then it's going to come down to the usual cold case solve, which is somebody gives it up, either out of conscience or a deathbed thing, or somebody else gets arrested. Listen, Josh, as ever, man, I love talking to you. I appreciate you. I'm going to see you tomorrow on the weekly wrap, correct?
Absolutely. Thank you,
All
my
right.
friend.
Before we go, tell everybody where to find you online. Now, so obviously, we're on Fox Nation together, but tell everybody where they can find you on your podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, please check out Courtroom Confidential on YouTube. I'd love to have everybody check it out. We talk about a lot of the same things, a lot of the stuff that we cover on the weekly
Sure.
rap sheet that we cover on here. We also cover on Courtroom Confidential. So please check it out. Thank you.
Yeah, it keeps us both sharp, right? This kind of stuff. So,
Exactly.
all right, man, I appreciate you. We'll talk soon. All right, guys, and just to sum us up for today, as I said, I promised a quick take on Cuba. If you haven't been following it, some Americans from Miami went over to Cuba in a boat, reportedly armed to the teeth, and according to the Cubans, got into a shootout, wounded a military member of the military on the Cuban side, but 4 Americans were killed. What the hell was going on there? Well, here's what you're not hearing, and we're going to be doing more on this on the Ops Desk. It's an absolutely fascinating story and frames everything that's going on right now in Cuba. 30 years to the day, so that's no accident, 30 years to the day. What happened was, 1997, was the incident involving the Brothers to the Rescue. Now, what was that? There was a Cuban group in Miami who had been flying over Cuba and distributing leaflets, humanitarian leaflets, calling for freedom for the Cuban people. Cuba already was a basket case. Fidel was still alive. Who didn't like this at the time was the Clinton administration. Bill Clinton was president. And the story goes that Bill Clinton was aware of the fact that this group was operating, didn't like it, warned the FAA, but did not warn this group that the Cubans were onto them. Now, whether they knew, they didn't know, how much the Cubans knew, how much the Cubans didn't know, remains to be seen. But the bottom line is, 30 years ago to the day, the Cubans shot down unarmed American planes They were not military planes. They were throwing leaflets out the window, but they were over Cuban airspace, killed a bunch of Americans. And now 30 years later, we have this latest incident with a speedboat. Doesn't seem to be an accident. That's the context. But the further context is while that all was happening, Rubio is in St. Kitts meeting with Raul Castro's grandson. Raul Castro being the brother of Fidel Castro, who is now 94. He's still alive. Fidel's gone. And the reports are that the talks are relative to this youngest Castro taking over Cuba, at least as nominally, and much like we did with Venezuela, in return for humanitarian aid from America, but an opening up of the nation fully to capitalism. And the Trump administration doesn't seem to be playing games here, as we saw with Maduro, and as I suspect we're about to see with Iran. I don't think it's going to be much of a give and take. I think it's going to be a little bit of an ultimatum, and I suspect that Rubio is not really in the mood to horse trade either. And finally, just to close, we had this snowball fight in Washington Square Park. The charges now have been dropped to misdemeanors. I could have guaranteed you that from the get-go. It's Alvin Bragg's office. They're saying there's no injury. Any other context, and the felonies would have stood. I can guarantee you that as well. But my question is this, and this is more a question for the police department than it is for Alvin Bragg's office. Why were there no arrests at the scene? Why did it get to the stage that it got to, where you have guys picking up humongous cinder block-sized blocks of ice and going after cops, and those cops took it and walked away? What you saw in that video would never have been countenanced in the past, certainly when I was working. And that doesn't mean you would, oh, everybody's going to get their heads busted or anything like that. No, you'd make arrests. They're attacking us. You stop them, and they are under. The acquiescence and the willingness just to take it and walk away shaking your head speaks volumes, far more than any reaction. And I even find the police commissioner's reaction here very muted as well. I know she's got to play ball with Mamdani, but I don't think she's going to be able to last very long. The reaction across the board has been way too muted. If that happened to any other group in New York, I'd like to see what Mamdani would have done if that had happened to people coming out of a mosque. And the response was, well, it was just a snowball fight. Okay? Obviously, it wouldn't have flown. I'm Paul Morrow for Nightwatch. We'll see you again soon here on the Ops Desk.